All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. We're alive and live. Currently broadcasting here from sunny Orange, California, where we are working hard on the next iterations of We're Alive Descendants. I'm Casey Wayland. I'm the writer, director, creator of We're Alive, and I'm here today to kind of give you a run through of exactly what it is that we do here. There's a lot of stuff to cover. We're going to kind of go from the very beginning, where we start with some of the core concepts, some of the little intricate details of the series, the writing, all the way through the post-production process. So thank you all for joining us. I know there's many of you who are joining us on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube as well, and wherever you are. Thank you. Thanks for hanging out. We're gonna have a fun time today. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We should be able to answer them live on the show. So if there's some like pertinent question that's on the topic of what we're talking about at the time, great. Let's talk about it. Let's go in. There's also going to be some really cool stuff here that if you are on our Patreon page, you may have had access to before, but we're going to pull back the curtain and even show stuff that even our patrons haven't seen before. So you're going to get a really in-depth, nice view of the series that you may have not seen before. Some maps, some script things that haven't been revealed until this point. So with that, let's go ahead and get things underway. I have a co-host here, Gino, who is here monitoring comments, dealing with all the live stream stuff in the background. So also, as we go through this and have any more questions about what exactly it is that we're covering and talking about, then we'll cover them. So I already see some comments coming through, so we'll address them as we go along, and let's just go ahead and get started. So one of the reasons why we're doing this is because, well, we are in the middle of producing the second half of the season of Descendants season 1, and I want to show you because this is kind of a fun thing to look at. But this is the season 1 first half scripts. This is what we've already recorded. And this is the second half of season 1, which is a significant amount for the remaining parts of the season. So we have an additional 7 chapters that we're currently sound designing and going through everything right now. It's been a lot. And the reason why we have to have this mid-season hiatus is because, well, we just have to get a lot of things done. As you will see today, there's a lot of things that we have to do to make sure that this series is done right, because there's really a lot to do. And as the next episodes get inevitably more complex, we have to do more things in terms of sound design and also, some of the details there. And there's also some delays in our world, too, that we'll talk about here shortly. So let's start with the very beginning. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to share my screen, and because you're going to be able to see a bit of what happens behind the scenes here. And the first thing I'm going to cover is, well, it all starts with the concept, with the script. And this is the season 1 Descendants script of The Walls Between Us. This is where chapter 1 begins. And a lot of people have wondered, well, why is it that it took so long for We're Alive Descendants to come out after We're Alive? And part of it is because it really took that long to develop. There's a lot of little pieces inside the story, not only for the characters to evolve, but also the world. And what I mean by that is that the show takes place 17 years, well, 17/18 years, depending on where we're jumping into, after the initial outbreak in 2027. And the initial outbreak was 2009. So there's a lot of things that will have had to evolve, and since then, whether it's the East Coast, whether it's the population count, things like that. A lot of things that have to be figured out, both in terms of the micro and macro of the story, meaning the characters or the world itself. One of the things about Descendants is that the world has changed significantly, but also the focus of the story needs to be character driven. So it's a balancing act of like, okay, well, how can we show you a good amount of the world, but also still focusing on our characters. Also, between We're Alive, Descendants, and the original series, we also had a significant amount of other stories that were told along the way. Like, for instance, we had our, right after We're Alive, The Story of Survival, we had Lockdown. And then we had Gold Rush. We also had a story called We're Alive Frontier, which is a We're Alive RPG series. That's the first 2 seasons. Actually, all the seasons are available on YouTube now if you want to stream them. And all of these elements really show off where the world has been evolving, and now Descendants sort of will bring them all together. Elements of all of them will end up appearing in Descendants, and you kind of have seen that a little bit so far. But some of the things that we've had to develop along the way is just what the world looks like. So here's a look behind the scenes of what exactly Westport looks like now. And as you can see, we started out in a very old. There's the original colony right there. Essentially, where Westminster was. And you can find it actually if you find Liberty Park. That's a little clue if you're ever looking for the original old colony. And then as you can see, it's expanded significantly through the Southern California area, including actually having various districts lined up. A lot of this was developed also based on geographical locations. Like if you notice, all the borders are coinciding with a lot of freeways and such, or natural boundaries. So that was sort of the development of this. Also, one of the things that they needed to have inside this was some additional resources to be able to do more things. One of them being the shipping port. It's actually known as Long Beach in our world, but they call it Rotterdam, which actually it's New Rotterdam. Rotterdam, if you're not familiar with, is one of the largest shipping ports in the world, and so they actually have they're kind of mimicking that, because the Westport is the only trading partner with the continental U.S. that is borderline the Pacific. And just to show you sort of where this grows from here is also the rest of the United States has also been developed. And this actually hasn't been shared yet, and it is a work in progress. So just bear with me a little bit. But see this little tiny green area? That's actually Westport, and you can see how much of unterritorialized area there is still in the frontier, and you still have old places like Boulder, Fort Irwin, and a bunch of other little things that might have been significant in the series. You can kind of see where they are. There's Prim and little places like that. Also, the East Coast is still very much a thing. It's a little bit separated. They're using a lot of natural barriers here to sort of contain everything. But that's just some of the story elements. Those are just the maps alone that kind of show you a little bit of this of the world that is We're Alive, and how much development kind of goes into it. Little things like even just population count. I went through and figured out what the survival rate for various countries would be. And along those lines, it sort of gave us a development to know actually how many people are left in the world. Because that's the thing, is you just can't just create and say, oh, this is, it's X amount. I like to, as a writer, have a background to know, okay, this is the reason why these things are in place. Because otherwise you don't have a foundation, and it just kind of, you grow off of nothing. You have to know how many people live in Westport for especially story elements that come later on. So once we get into the script phase, now the script phase, if you notice, it's not written like a normal, if you're used to like novels, it's not written like that. It's actually written very much like a television script, where there's different characters that are, saying different things. It has their dialogue underneath their name. One of the reasons why it's actually done this way is so that when you are recording, it's very easy for the actors to be able to see their lines, highlight them, and it keeps everything kind of condensed. Also, another reason is that why the script formatting is important is because you can do breakdowns, which then are useful for scheduling later. You can go through and say, okay, well, how many lines does the character Judd have in this scene? And then so that way you can do a breakdown so you're not missing any lines. Because when you have a script Like the script of Descendants is about 750, 800 pages long. It's going to be very easy to miss a line. And in a script, one line can be a huge difference for something to be able to make sense. So this right here is the original script. This is actually version 24. It took a lot of iterations to get this written and done, and then continually to be built off of that. The original Descendants scripts actually were written, I believe, all the way back in 2018, 2019. That's when I first started writing the actual scripts. I went through a lot of iterations of changing things, moving characters, just figuring out what works best in the story. Because the one thing about whenever you start is you can't go back. You can't restart. So all the little details are very important to make sure that they track along the way. And you want to make sure that you get the character arcs, the backgrounds for all those characters making sense. There's a lot that's changed from the beginning, and you have to make sure it all works out. So a couple questions is, what does my writing process look like for going through a lot of this? Well, one of the big things in this process is being able to make sure that it all makes sense. It all has a linear pathway. So doing outlines, doing character backgrounds, doing a lot of research, like looking at maps and things like that, especially with looking at the world, being able to understand where things are, why they're located there. Like one of the things that we have inside of Westport is they have Lake Matthews. Lake Matthews is an outpost that they have further along the railroad tracks that connect them to the rest of the world. And this is sort of like a buffer before you ever get to Westport. So it's kind of like a very long sally port to make sure that, things get filtered out before it ever enters the city. It's almost like a quarantine zone where, if anybody's coming from the outside world, they go through Lake Matthews in process, and then they can go into the rest of the city. And so interesting elements like that, are contained in the outline and part of the story flushing out process, and just understanding the characters. And the characters, that's the number one important part, is how you make sure that all these characters make sense. And also they have a lot of room to grow. Like some people right now are not the biggest fan of Nicholas, which is totally okay, partially intentional, because of the background of the characters. And as you find out more about them as they grow, and they change along with the story. Because if you remember Story of Survival, one of the things that I think that's part of the story process is being able to grow with the characters, letting them change, letting them, letting the situations and things that happen help them or hurt them for the growth of their character. And all of that is very important for the storytelling process, because if everything stays the same, then none of it's not as interesting. Also, one of the things about We're Alive Descendants is it's a very different story. It's not the initial story is all about survival in terms of like we're staying in one location. We branch out a little bit as we go, but it's all about like the day-to-day survival stuff of where you're going to eat, you're getting water supplies. Now, because they actually have the infrastructure for, being able to survive in this world, they have all the water pumping plants, the filtration. There's like a bigger grand scheme of things. And so now we can focus on some of the bigger elements of what it is that's going on in the world, rather than just focusing on some of the smaller things. The day-to-day is taken care of. Now let's talk about the bigger portions of the world, and some of the bigger themes that happen as well. So that's sort of the process of developing a story and getting this ready for the recording stage. And then we get into casting. Now, Gino, do we have any questions coming in about story stuff that we can cover now before we move on into the casting and production process?
Hello.
Hey, everyone. This is Gino.
Howdy. We got a question from Paul. Wondering about the continuity across seasons. And if you've already had season 4 mapped out in your head before season 1 even began recording.
Talking about story survival is what I'm assuming. Parts of it, yes. So when I first initially started out with the We're Alive outlines, I had the first 2 seasons rigorously plotted out all the way to the very end of it. And then I had scattered bullet points of where I wanted to go after that, to where you sort of know the destination and where you're going to go. But you still have to figure out a little bit along the way. Also, I was growing a lot as a writer and also kind of figuring out the characters a bit. So I wanted to give myself some room to play with the characters. And there's some stuff that I ended up changing because of what was going on inside the story. And just there's some characters I want to explore a little more, and some routes I wanted to go down. So I'd say the first 2 seasons were like 100% plotted out. A lot of stuff actually ended up falling to the wayside, and we whittled down for some from there. But in terms of the 4-season arcs, they were more like guideposts along the way, with the eventual climax sort of figured out, but giving yourself a path there. So yeah. Any others, Gino? We got one coming in from Taryn. I'll just answer now because it just popped in. How do you write differently for an audio drama versus a regular with visual drama or script? Well, initially, one of the big things that I wanted to make sure that we did was I really paint the picture for the listener, and so they could hear everything that's happening, because it's a very blind medium, meaning that you don't have any visuals. You have to find clever ways to, force visualization on the audience. And one of the ways I did that in the beginning was to do like voiceover, the narration, using a journal as the, basis for what was happening inside the story. Partly because I hadn't written in the audio medium before. I had done a lot of visual stuff. So to do the audio medium, you kind of have to know a little bit of like how you can, visualize something. And the journals felt like a really good way of doing that. But with the Descendants story, all the narration has gone away, partly because you're forced to sort of a perspective when you have the journals. Like, you can't go onto the other side. Like, part of the reason we never saw the perspective of the Maulers, or the limited perspective we had on the Maulers, was because it was based around somebody's account and somebody's way that they, wrote something. There's a little bit of wiggle room here and there in terms of like they kind of assumed and put some things together, but it all had to do the basis of using the journals. Well, I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to kind of expand that perspective. And so to do that for audio, it requires a kind of little things here and there, like cues to kind of understand what's going on. Like, say, for instance, this scene with Nicholas and Lisa, when they're initially inside this place, the little cafe that they're in, you got to establish a couple things first. Like, you want to know where they are, who, what, why, where, and when. Essentially, is who's in the scene, where they are, where they are, when they are, why they're in the scene, who, what, why, where, when. So yeah, so all those little elements you kind of have to figure out. So if you're in a like little cafe like this, you can have sound effects to help paint the picture to understand where exactly we are. And then so that's a clue. And then start with like some of the background, and then establish who's in the scene. He's with Lisa. Turn all the attention away from you, and then so you get an idea of who they are. They're on a date. And then they're getting a little bit of the background, and you start to know more about the story. So it's really about establishing and kind of answering all the questions a listener might have before they ever ask them, so that then when you're filling in new information, they kind of know where they're going. And then also like tailoring elements of the storytelling to focus on the audio side of it. Like later on in the first chapter, there is a train attack. And that train attack is a really important part of it to be able to understand what's happening in the story. So we use a device where the background of what's happening is told by Secretary Dora, getting what's happening on that train ride. And then also we have the Hog's voiceover, which is setting out the expectations of the world. And so we get a little bit of background of the event that happened, the world, and also the perspective and how people are, responding to it. So it's kind of a complex way. The more that I've done this, the more that I kind of play with the medium to overlap some of these elements and go back and forth and do some cross-cutting to try and, do some things that are a little different instead of just having, straight up narration. Any other questions, Gino, before we move on to the next section? Okay, so Paul asks, every character feels grounded and believable. How do you go about writing characters with different cultural backgrounds, upbringing, personalities, etc.? Datu versus Kalani versus CJ versus Victor, etc. That's interesting. So one of the things that I feel is very strongly about is to take inspiration from real life and to use that as an actual guide to understanding people, because a character is created, but a person is something that evolves from somewhere. And so sort of keeping both of those ideas in mind is you have to understand and think about where this person comes from. If you're using real life inspiration, like Bert sort of had some real life inspiration from several people, they have a certain perspective in the way that they talk, the way that they carry themselves, their mannerisms. And so you want to sort of encapsulate what those people are like in a very condensed way. That way you sort of understand exactly what it is that makes that person tick. And so a lot of the original characters, especially some of the soldiers, I would pull pieces of soldiers that I worked with in real life. People that I either trained with or were in a unit with or were in the field with. A lot of the military background stuff sort of was carried from there. Like Saul was a direct inspiration from some of the people that I interacted with. And even one of the lines that they say, and I have gotten some slack about this, is some of the slack-jawed nature of their, how Saul is very forward about his, sexuality, and he sort of, quote unquote, comes off as a womanizing person in the beginning. That sort of kind of came from a real person, and the way that they sort of talked a big game, but really behind the surface, that wasn't who they were. So that sort of real inspiration kind of came from a place and made those characters different in that way. And as they evolve, obviously they change and they sort of kind of find themselves a little bit through the story. And but having a good grasp of those characters helps make it grounded and also gives you room to grow in the story, and also makes them different, because the last thing that I think anybody would want is to have all these characters sound and act exactly the same. Especially in audio, one of the ways to be able to tell a story is that no one can look alike or sound alike. And that's actually some of the characters and things that end up being in the story, how they evolve and how they change through the story is a big part of it. So, using that inspiration from real life and then kind of going from there. But really, you just want to make sure that these voices sound different. And speaking of voices, that's kind of a good segue to kind of jump in and talk about casting for this, and how we go from the script to the next process, which is recording. Because one of the things that you have to think about is, not only do you make the characters sound different on the page, but you have to make sure that the characters sound different in real life. If they're not real, if they don't sound different, they all sound alike, you get some problems. Weirdly enough, not all the time does this end up perfect, because there are some times where characters can sound alike, but you just, you do your best. But some people, and I've got this a couple times, I don't hear it at all, is they think that Saul and Puck sound similar. And I don't think they do at all. It's I think they're kind of very polar opposite characters in some way. But hey, everyone's ear is different in how they differentiate and hear voices. But this was a big thing for us, is making sure, especially the core characters, that Nicholas, Vera, and Alex all were very different. Those are sort of the three primary characters for We're Live Descendants. There are more, obviously, but those are the three that I wanted to make sure had very distinct voices. And actually, one of the things that we did to kind of help that process along was we did early casting inside of Gold Rush. So you get an idea of who these characters are before they ever get fully introduced inside of Descendants. So we cast them then. And then we went through a lot of people to find their best Vera, Nicholas, and Alex. And we also did chemistry reads where we put all three characters in the same room. This was back in 2018, 2019, when we were working on Gold Rush. And when we had them back all in the same room, we could see who was compatible with each other, because that's the thing is you want to make sure that these characters, interact and have a good chemistry between one another. And that was actually something that we did back in the original Story of Survival. When we did our first initial casting session, we had our recording stage, and we brought in people and we had them record. And the interesting thing about that is, in the original Story of Survival, we had characters swap reads all the time. Like Nate Gies, who plays Saul, came in initially for wanting to be Michael. And I think we all know that wouldn't have been a good fit. But he read for that role, and other people read for different roles. And that's how we sort of found the best compatibility with them, is like we kind of tried somebody here, we tried somebody here. I think we even had Scott Marvin, who plays Bert, read for Michael as well. And weirdly enough, all the characters sort of fell into the right spots. And even Jay Olegario, who played Datu, actually the original role, the original maintenance man, his name was Jesus, and we changed the ethnicity of the character to match the sort of voice and intonations that Jay Olegario was able to bring with Datu and his background of Tagalog. So it was interesting to see like all these pieces come together in casting and finding the right people for the roles, because that's the other thing too, is you only get one chance at it. I will say that one of the hurdles that we ended up having to run into with Descendants, and I'll talk about them because they were pretty considerable, is we actually did end up with COVID, when we recorded initially back in 2020, we did lose one of the cast members. They moved on to a different sort of profession. They didn't want to really do any more acting. And so we had to recast the role and basically re-record one of those roles, being able to be able to do the initial release. So sometimes things happen too, where you have to just deal with actors or people, and having to deal with how all this works. You're managing a cast and having to do something over long periods of time. You're going to run into all these sort of things that happen. Yeah. And so then we move on to the recording stage. Any questions before we get on to the recording stage? I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to open up Pro Tools now. As it's loading, Gino, do we have anything that we could talk about? Daniel Lynn says, love having a podcast where the military jargon is actually correct. Usually it's so distracting. Me and a couple guys in my unit listen together. That's awesome. Like, yes, I work very hard to try and make sure that all the military jargon is correct and true. Speaking of, I still have, a lot of it's burned in your brain, but I still have like my initial entry training soldier's handbook from April of 2001, and all the different, every single little thing you have to know about everything from parts of the rifle to unit formations to even marching. All these little things. A lot of it is actually so ingrained in my brain, you just can't get rid of it. But there's sometimes actually nice things to know, like, squad formations and things like that. There it is. So yeah, it's very helpful to actually have like a background in all of these things where you can really understand and know, all the details of what actually is here. Okay, so let's see here. Voice cut, Descendants, stage 1. There we go, stage 1. So what I'm doing now is I'm bringing up Pro Tools. This is the original Pro Tools session for Descendants. This is our day 2 recording. And this is what it typically looks like in the very beginning. We use Pro Tools. Pro Tools is a very high-end recording software which allows you to do multi-track recording. The interesting thing about this is that as we record, you can specifically see various elements of the audio as it comes through, so that if there's any sort of issues like peaking or plosives, things like that, you can actually see them on the tracks, which is very helpful. It also allows you to record everyone at the same time on different microphones. So we have a scene with, here's Kelly, Victor, and Pegs. So this is, I believe, from a later episode. I think this is episode 3 or 4 of Descendants. Or excuse me, chapter 4. And as you can see, we end up with a lot of different takes at the same time. And I'll go ahead and play a little bit of this here. Let's see. This is...
That again? You're watching the trilogy for the millionth time, aren't you?
And we actually had Bert remote.
What, you don't like the Tolkien references?
Not even 5 minutes, and I'm annoyed.
Love you too, darling.
Sorry it took so long. This one got lost.
I'm never in this area. What do you want from me?
Next you'll be telling me you brought some hobbit with you.
So there's us kind of sort of testing. I think that was a test right there. But you can see that everyone sort of performs with each other at the same time. One of the big things about recording a series is being able to have that interaction where you can have people in real time be able to, talk with one another.
Battle tested, just like
even
us.
Even if we have like Bert remotely, we still recorded him at the same time, and that way we bring the high quality stuff later. But the big interaction of how everyone reacts, matching energy levels, is incredibly important. And I try and get everyone in the same booth at the same time. Doesn't always work because people move away. You have a lot of characters who are who have moved to other states. Matter of fact, Jim Gleason, who plays Michael, he moved away to Louisiana back in season 3 of We're Alive: Story of Survival, and yet he's still around. We've recorded him ever since. We just have recording studios that we have to do remotely. It makes things complicated, but the nice thing is because Jim worked with us and worked with the other characters for so long, that he kind of already had an idea of what everyone sounded like and how they interact, so that it was easier to do things remotely from then on. Okay, so this is how everything kind of comes in. You get everyone on different tracks.
Is he going to be like this the whole time?
Actually, I already had it pulled out of storage. I've been having some of my team.
So there's a lot of mistakes along the way. So that's why you do multiple takes. We typically do about 3 takes each. And actually, this is, if I go ahead and pull this over here, this is, so you saw the script in the original version here. This is the version that is marked up when we record. So these are all different time codes. You notice there's a time code up here. When we do recordings, we typically mark everything in time. If there's ever a character that's missing, we'll skip over those sections. Let's see here as we scroll down. Sometimes we'll do pickups. We'll do modifications to the script as we record them because there's certain things we don't, we want to add. Like, oh, hey, this doesn't sound right. Let's add this word here. Let's subtract this here. Let's get some additional background, elements here. Because the graduation required a lot. The more people you have in a scene, especially crowds and stuff, it's hard to work with. So we had a lot of extra pieces that you'd have to do. And then this was a large scene. Also, we had to do 2 different times because Vera was there, but we also had Secretary Dora, which recorded, I believe, at a different time. So it's really can sometimes get very complicated, as you see, because you have Hogs, you have Dora, CJ. They're all recorded at different times and yet the elements kind of come together. Granted, Hogs is giving a speech, and Secretary Dora and CJ in the foreground. But this is how you have to sort of catalog it. That way, because if you see these sessions, they're gigantic. This is just 1 day of recording. That's about 5.5 hours there of raw recording. That's just when we're actually recording the characters. And to find a line inside of here, like obviously you don't have any visual cues, so you have to know exactly where everything is. Sometimes you can add markers. Sometimes you can go back and just find it based on, just luck. But really, it's hard because we also record out of order. Because what we did was, or how we arrange this in scheduling, is we try and group all the character scenes that they have that are alike together. So all the scenes with like Mira, Kelly, Victor, Pegs, Bert, all those scenes we recorded at once. That way they're not just sitting around while the other characters read, because you can't record in order with the scripts because that wouldn't make any sense. It's all about optimizing things, and that's how they do things in motion pictures too. You don't want to like build a set, leave and then have to come back to that set. They usually get all the things in that location done at once. Even if it is later on in the story. So every time that you see somebody like inside of a building that's sets used often or all the time. They'll usually shoot all the scenes there and then just make sure that continuity makes sense. It's a little bit easier in the audio world because we don't have to do a lot of continuity stuff of like taking pictures of what people are wearing, but it is a factor as they go. So we take all of this and we end up going to the stage 2, which is our assembly and vocal cut. So this is stage 1 here. This is just the raw recording. And then we go from here to putting all the elements together and taking all these takes that we have with, Dean and Nicholas and all the different characters, and we end up stacking them on top of each other so that we can have alternates to be able to choose from. So this is an example of an early voice cut here. And we have that scene. Here's that diner scene that we have with Nicholas and Lisa right here.
Yes, sorry. Not a problem, ma'am. Thank you.
So not a lot of background elements.
Is everything okay?
Yeah, something just... I don't know. But I apologize. I did not mean to take any attention away from you because you deserve it all.
So actually, I don't think this is even the last performance selection that we did. I think we have some other takes. Well, anyway, what we have here is this allows us then, because it's all organized, we can actually play around and see, okay, well, which Lisa do we like better?
Is everything okay?
That one, or...
Is everything okay?
Every little intonation that an actor does can mean something.
Is everything okay? Is everything okay?
So, and these are all the different takes that we have that we're able to choose from to ultimately find how they work and interact together. And that's why we have multiple takes of each person. So the assembly cut and vocal cuts here essentially put everything in order because obviously we record out of order, and then go through and allow us to then kind of pick and choose. Scenes where, especially like you have an action sequence where you have to go through and see what works in terms of energy levels. Like when we have this initial scene with Alvin, there's a lot of additional lines that you want to make sure come through in the action sequences, and so having those extra options are very, very important. You don't even see. If you look over here on the left, it's maybe a little hard to see, but there are a lot of tracks and a lot of additional. There's like 7 Michael alternate tracks for just for Michael alone to be able to choose those alternates to see if they work. Because ultimately, it's all about trying to make these scenes flow, and sometimes a take is not going to have the right energy. There might be a mistake in it. There might be something that doesn't match with another character, an overlap that just you can't fix, or a problem in the audio. So having all these extra takes really gives you more ability to play with it. And also, one of the things that takes a long time is just getting to this point here where you are working with the flow of everything to make sure that all the pieces come together. And this is just the vocal cut, but you can already see like how many pieces to the puzzle are in here in just one episode. And this isn't even showing all the alternate takes. And this is like an action sequence here. We're gonna play the final version of this in just a second, so that all the you can hear all the elements come together. Matter of fact, let's do this now. Let's go to the final version of this. You can see where's the live stream session? Here we go. I preloaded all of these just to make things a little bit easier. And all these sessions, I mean, it takes a long time to put this stuff together. It's just, as you have seen how, the process so far, this is sort of the final stage, aside from, getting it out there. But this is the entire session of Descendants. And you can see this is the worldview here. This is both parts. And you can just see it just keeps going. Here's all the voices up here. All these little tiny little dots are all individual takes and lines and dialogue that have been meticulously like broken down. Like here's the train attack. This is actually one of my favorite sequences here. But before I play it, I'm actually going to check a couple things. So inside of our sessions, we actually have a lot of really complex pieces inside this process. We have something called spaces, which allows us to actually recreate the environments that the characters are in. so that we record everything in a very dry environment, meaning that the recording booth is completely, there's no reverb, meaning that there's no echo. Everything is very, very plain. And I'll give you an example of that in just a second as I check all of these. Sometimes these end up resetting and then make everything sound very, very odd. So it's good to sometimes check them before a session comes in. There we go. Everything seems fine. We also do things where, like a radio effect here, where all of a sudden we have like a speakerphone where an element is being played over a speaker that has a special process on it. So here, let's go ahead and listen to this a little segment here. Let's go back to the Nick Lisa scene really quickly. Actually, you know what? Let's go to this Judd scene.
Alvin!
Oop, sorry to have you burst your eardrums there.
His work dies if we die with it.
Then fine, run! I would be honored to hold the line.
So there is Alvin inside the cave. If we were to have that line by himself, that Alvin line, you hear that he's inside the cave. It's very, very clean, but it's also got that echo. But if we were to solo it and you could hear it by itself,
his work dies if we die with it.
So that's how it's recorded, and then inside the scene it sounds like this.
His work dies if we die with it.
So it's kind of a nice way of essentially worldizing the characters, where they can find their way inside the environments, and you can switch things. So when Alvin's inside the cave, and then he's outside the cave, and he's inside the car, all of these environments end up shifting, so that when he's here, he's running, and then he'll get inside the car here.
Such a bad idea.
So that goes inside the car.
I still have the papers. At least I have his research. Whoa!
And then gets out of the car. So we have little markers to tell us exactly where all these things come in, but all the little tiny details are then filled in the background. You have, if I was to just solo all the sound effects here by themselves, you can sort of hear just what goes through the process of designing a simple scene like this. And all these sound effects are all meticulously selected and planned, from the getting in the car, like you don't hear all these things. I mean, the background car is sort of muted right now. So the engine, you're just getting all the little individual elements here, but all of those tiny things are all planned out and selected to match the vehicles that he's in. Then we have the tire brakes, when he stops the car, the brakes. And those are done so they're sounding like they're far away. Because if you're inside a car, it sounds different when something's outside the car. And then even things like the actual engine itself. And then we have the stopping of the car. So even things, cars are sometimes complex because they have to act like a character. So a scene, excuse me, a question came in from Daniel Lynn, and I'll highlight it real quick. It says, do you guys do your own background action noise sound booth work? Yes and no. So it depends on what we're looking at here. So we have a pretty extensive library of sound effects to pull from. And so we have, I'll even load it up in the background so you kind of see exactly what our options are. We have a fair amount of libraries that we have purchased and licensed to choose from. So say, for instance, we're looking for a truck door. We have a lot of options here. So we have 1,904 truck doors. So we have a lot of options to pull from our sound effects library, which may sound like a lot, but then when you're actually boiling it down to it, to find the right one that matches the characterization of what you want is sometimes difficult, which is why when we do scenes that are very difficult sound effects wise, we also will do a lot of our own sound creation. It's called Foley. Foley is typically one of the big things we do with Foley is footsteps, because one of the things about Foley is when you're Foleying a scene, to get somebody to walk in the right sort of cadence and react to what's happening is very difficult. This scene here, where Nick is walking along the streets of Westport, which was a very important scene to be able to understand the world. Actually, is this the restaurant? This is the restaurant. Okay, so this is Nick and Lisa at the date, and all their movements in the chair at the table. So all this is done by an artist. So there's him sitting back down. So some of the stuff appears in the background. And then when he's walking through the town, let's see if I can get to that scene here. Lisa, and then footsteps, Nick. There's them. Oh, here we go. So like them outside when they're walking. Oops. Recreating all these feet. That's them going down like some steps there. And then we have Nick going through the town here. There's a grit to this footsteps that end up adding in like a little bit of... So the town isn't exactly very clear. It's not super clean, as if it's like a polished surface. That extra grit sort of adds some characters he's going through. And then little iterations too. So we'll listen to this scene. We'll listen to the interactions like as he's going through, he stops to listen to the TV as the TV is playing. And then when he's walking through and has an interaction with these other characters, his footsteps change as well. So he interacts with them as he's going through. So all this stuff is really important to be able to like really, visualize what's happening in the scene. And you don't really notice it until it might be missing. And that's where we come in. The rule of Foley, where you're creating custom sound effects, is that if a character interacts with something, whether holding it or, walking, typically you're going to get better results with that. If they're just walking a couple steps and then stopping, you might be able to find a sound effect for it. Or you might be able to do virtual Foley, which we sometimes do with a keyboard, where you can hit a keyboard and make them walk. But typically, if it's something like a fight scene or something where somebody's scrambling and sliding or dragging on the ground, a lot of that is done with Foley and recreated with a pair of headsets like these, where you're listening to the scene and then performing it again for the microphone. So you can see sort of all the elements, all the tiny little things that end up going into one little scene, just to make sure that it all makes sense. And then also even one of the most complex things is background, like the protesters here.
We can't let these warmongers push us around. Yes. People aren't the enemy.
Soldier coming in. Let him through. Make a hole.
So, like, that scene was really complex. Thankfully, actually, we recorded that at Podcast Movement 2019 in Florida with a whole bunch of podcasters. We did it outside and recorded it on the Zoom and had them do all those little things. Because we're at a convention that's about podcasting, everyone was really cool about it. And it was really easy to get everybody. But we have all these elements, all these different takes.
Kill infected, not humans. Kill infected, not
little fade out there. And so we do have all these different extra bits of walla just to make this scene come to life, because the more people you have, all those things have to be recorded, and it does take a lot of time. Bobby Finn asks, so there's a Foley team? That's how you spell it? Yes, that is how you spell it. Sometimes it's with a capital F because it's a little history lesson here. Jack Foley, who is a Foley artist, or the godfather of Foley, was a sound designer for Warner Brothers and ended up sort of coining the phrase and the process of doing this. So they sort of became their that sort of became how this worked. In other words, another little thing I'll show here that we have that's very special is when we do really special effects with like something called a speakerphone. So here's Pete's Market that's being advertised in the background.
Portable test now available for purchase from Pete's Market. Simply add the blood sample to the vial, shake, and if it's red, drop them dead. Successful against slow turners, blood, and saliva infections. When there's no turning back, it's essential to know. QI tests available at Pete's Market.
So that's one of the original. One of the original advertisements. If you remember Pete back in the day, he has his own market now. And then so that modification there, we'd let it exist inside the environment, the little reverb, but we also want to make sure it sounds like it comes from a speaker. So this is one of our special tools that we have. It's a special plugin that allows us to make things sound like it originates from a little speaker and play with how that reacts inside a world. It's a very good shortcut for when we have to do things like this and make things sound like they're on a speaker. Matter of fact, right after this, we use it again, where we have a TV reporter come up.
This is Iola Studley with Local Global News on this Monday, July 12th, 2027. Tensions continue to mount between Westport and the Republic after an unplanned overnight expansion along the former...
You want to know a little secret, too, about that voice? That voice also plays another character called Dot, who comes up later in the series. Hopefully that doesn't spoil anything, but it's very interesting to see the contrast between that TV reporter and what that character was later on. Dylan asks, is Pete still voiced by good old Greg? Yes. Game Over Greggy is still the voice of Pete. He actually recorded that, I don't know, like 3 years ago. So it's, it took a long time to get these episodes underway. Speaking of, that's a good segue to sort of talk about a little bit of why this process took so long. Well, for one, actually, our original recording when we did all of this, where we brought everyone in to record, was March of 2020. Now, if you could all remember March of 2020, that was the start of something crazy. Anyway, that whole thing that ended up starting then put a gigantic delay in how we had to release. Not only were we not able to record again after that, we were able to get the first 5 episodes in the can, but everything was so in turmoil at that point. We're lining up funding sources for Descendants, which ended up backing out, and because of the everything that was going on in the world, and it was crazy. It was a crazy time. And so we had to revisit and come back and basically, in a way, start over to be able to do this. And then when we did that, we were able to when we came back, we were able to record the last 7 chapters and also get all this underway. Because as you can see through all this process, it takes a long amount of time. All the little tiny details that are put in here along the way. The last thing that I wanted to share with you, and one of the most important parts of the post-process, is the music. And we have been blessed to have one of the best composers out there, Danny Burkhoff Hopkins, who has been with us for several seasons now, who loves doing this, and we also love them and all the amazing stuff that they create. So this is the initial cave scene here. I'll move forward a little bit so you can kind of hear where it gets. Now there's some leveling here. You can kind of tell as the scene has more action, we sort of dip things down a little bit. You don't really notice it inside the scenes, just to make sure certain elements are heard. So eventually we do plan on releasing an album of all that fun stuff. Eventually, that is. And the other thing I want to share with the music is one of the cool things also that we've done is we've evolved our theme song many times over the years. And so this is our Descendants theme. And if you listen, it has a combination of all the previous themes from Gold Rush, Lockdown, and even some additional more stuff here. So it is, if you follow the series, there's a lot of elements that are added in. This one has more of a sort of the military background in terms of the trumpets and also the drums that's happening in there. Partly because the story sort of evolves with that, with the characters. Like we get the background of Nicholas and Alex and Vera finishing up their training. Well, Alex, yes, I know he graduated previously, but they're finishing up. So there's a lot of duty, camaraderie, and there's military elements also with the Republic and some of the other story stuff. So the theme itself embodies a little bit of what the story will end up going to later on. So a couple questions that have come up. I don't know exactly where this question was or who asked it, but the question is, how does the story characters change from writing to recording to editing to sound design? Well, the big thing is, obviously writing is where you're setting the foundation for what they say. You give them the script, they give you all the lines, then they perform it. But obviously, inside the booth is where things change. The interaction of the characters, some dialogue will change. I'd say in the booth it changes maybe about 5%. Where you'll add in something, you can ad-lib something. Because we have so many pages of dialogue, we don't spend a lot of time on one scene. So being able to ad-lib and creatively do stuff is a little difficult for the actors to do, especially when we do so much in a day. So they're a bit limited in what they can do. The characters don't change too much, but the nice thing is we have gone back and actually done pickups and changes to things. Sometimes it's because I made a mistake. That has happened because when you have so many pages, some things go wrong. And here's a good example. Is we had the background TV reporter say a whole bunch of different things, but then I realized that we were missing some pieces. So then I actually had Chancellor Friedrich have a little bit extra. So that's so I ended up adding a little bit more to Friedrich's line here. When we were going through the editing process. So when we cast Friedrich, we actually went back and added some more in there as well. Also, we went back and added some more stuff in the opening sequence, changed a couple little things here and there. The opening sequence was actually done several years ago. After we recorded in March of 2020, we actually recorded a couple things there. That were then, we want to change out. And also here's another one is we added another person on the street. You can read that title. I'm not gonna comment on it because it might be some spoilers later on. So question coming in from Spicy. Do the voice actors do a lot? We're try one more time. There we go. Do voice actors do a lot of improv? Sometimes they do. It depends on the scene, depends on how comfortable they are with each other too. One of the things that you can do in the booth but you can't do anywhere else is improv. The original story Survival, we had probably a lot more, I'll be honest. Partly because some of the actors that we pull from, they are improv actors. Like actually, I will say that Seal, who is a character in Descendants, who's one of the animals, that'll make sense if you're there. They are from the improv world, and they do a lot of improv. I give them the lines, and then they just have a lot of fun with it. And so that person did a lot of improv. So it depends on the comfortability of the actors and how they do things. Dean is another character that ends up doing a lot of little, modifications to the script in the booth, and it's a lot of fun. It's when characters add their own little flavor, it does add some really cool elements. Sometimes it hits the cutting room floor, and it's unfortunate, but that's what we have to do sometimes. All right. So after this stage is when we deliver everything to the fans. We'll export it all, take all the elements, and bounce it to you. This first episode alone is 2 parts. The first part being 42 minutes long. The second part being 42 minutes long as well. So both parts are 42 minutes long. So this is essentially 40 and 40, over an hour and a half. If I'm doing that math. No, it's a little less than an hour and a half. But it's about an hour and a half of content here. And that's just one chapter. And then we have to do the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So our editors, they get a little tired. They're working on this stuff all the time. Like right now, we're in the process. I'm editing chapter 11. Another editor is doing rough cuts of chapter 9. Another editor is doing more final cuts of chapter 6 and 7. So we have a lot going on at the same time to make sure that all these sort of elements come together and it's smooth. Everything sounds good because we're very meticulous with the details with all this stuff because you can only release it once. So our release schedule when we do these is we release, if it's a 2-part chapter, we'll release a part, and then we'll take a week off. And the reason why is because usually we're going through this process of, polishing, of checking things, of, just to listen to these episodes alone, like that takes an hour and a half just to do a quality control on this episode. So you can imagine how long the process takes because audio, you have to edit in real time. You can't really fast forward. You have to be able to hear all the elements of how they come together. And not like television where you kind of shuttle through a little bit. And also the editing is infinite, where you can, if you want to go back and, get a Riley performance over and over.
Maybe it's for the better. I suppose being in the military, it's hard to really be in a relationship.
So if you want to go through and go back and find the alternate takes and swap this out, we even do things where you'll take part of a word and cut a part of a word in, and so it's almost infinite amount of editing where you can slide something over, move it back, and do all those fun sort of micro edits in there, and that is the process there from beginning to end. I know it kind of covers a lot. Let's go through some of your questions. All right, so I'll do some of the ones that ended up coming in at the very end here, and then Gino has a whole bunch that I'm going to jump into here in just a second. Why don't I put up the Westport map while we chat? So Omer asks, how do you organize all the editors and vocal cutters? It sounds really complex. Well, that's a good question. What we do is we organize things through, it's called a digital post-production workflow. And that may sound complex, but really it's essentially how you go from one stage to the next, to the next, to the next, and track the edits along the way. So, like I said, the stage of the process is we have our raw recording, which essentially is just all the new recorded tracks. And then we're going to break everything up and then assemble it. So we have an assembly cut after that, which just puts everything in order and also has the alternate takes beneath them. Then we do the vocal cut, which essentially picks which one is the best and then times everything out so that you can base all the rest of the edit around it. Because once you set the timing and the voices, it's much harder once you start adding in extra elements. And then we'll do the rough cut, which is adding in all the extra elements of sound effects. And then the last part is fine-tuning, adding music, adding Foley. Foley usually ends up coming in last, depending on how it is in the process. And then doing a balancing adjustments, making sure all the elements work with each other instead of against it. And so so by having that process that tracks through, we're able to have a good idea of where everything goes. And just to show you sort of how many iterations of that can be. Here's a small example. How can I get this so it's not going to be too much? Here's just a small example of how many different versions can be up there. This is all the different cuts along the way. And this is actually not all of them. Here's the old sessions, which has even more. So this is just, you see rough cut, fine cuts. And then we also have like little dates and things of where each one was and when the process started. You can see that we started this all the way back in, there's some cuts that come in from 2020 that actually aren't even in here. So it just takes a long time. It's a lot of stages, and that's one of the reasons why I want to show you all this today, is so you get an idea of what the process is. All right, more questions coming up. Let's see here. Oh, Game Son says, are you planning to do another side series like We're Alive, like the Gold Rush series? Yes. In fact, after this session here, I'm going to preview a segment of that we've been doing for We're Alive Scouts Honor, which is our last side story. Coincidentally, that may have a little origin in Catalina here on Westport's map. So that's some upcoming story stuff. So that'll be in the next, hopefully the next year that'll be released. So we're working on that, and also some of the preliminary pieces to make sure we can get that ready. Let's see here. All right, Gino, do you mind popping in and give us? Oh, I have one Jackal here. It says, when is the next episode? It's coming in the fall. We're working on all 7 chapters right now, and so we'll have a lot of the, we're just getting it done. And those are, I'll put it like this: when you hear what happens in the story, you'll understand why these are taking a little bit longer. There's some action sequences right off the bat that are really complex, and we've had to do a lot of sound design for infected and zombies that are new. So it's a big process. Gino, what do we got? You want to read them to me, or Gino is having audio? That's okay. All right, so I will go through the list here. Then I can see. I'll do one at a time, and if you have any extras, Gino, just go ahead and pop them down in there. Are we gonna see Lady again? No, no, we won't. Blake, just because, well, see, dogs only live a certain amount of time, and yeah, we're gonna leave it like that. Is Casey Canadian? No, I am Californian. I'm pretty native Californian, to be honest. My family's been here for a very, very long time. Very long time. I have descendants deep into the state. So I am very, very Californian at this point. Are we getting a poster? Bodo asks that. Yes, we have the Cole poster. It'll be released. We're figuring out how to do the printing for it because we have done some of these. I don't know if you can see the Gold Rush poster. I don't want to mess up my camera too much. It's over there. It's a great poster. I love that poster. That poster actually took like a year to make. Just with all the details that we had to put into it. And I knew I was going to mess up my framing. I'll find the framing. There we go. Yes, so we will get a new poster eventually, and we'll figure out all the details. Ebony asks, is Nicholas Tink the only person of his kind immune? Yes and no. No, he's not the only one. Is the only one that we might encounter in the story? Possibly. I'm gonna leave that open. It is very rare to be not only immune, but also to have survived. Because even if you're immune, it doesn't mean that you'll survive. And so I think it was 99.97% of the population got wiped out. So we're of that 0.03%, you're talking about an even smaller amount. Side stories, we talked about that. Could we get a prequel that gives character backstories? Actually, yes. We are working on one. It's a book that's going to go into the background of the families, which will have details about that later on in the story, because that's going to be a big part of upcoming parts, or maybe part of it now. Will we ever find the story of the crew of the Coast Guard helicopter? Side story like Lockdown? Stephen was asking that. Most likely not. The reason why we choose certain side stories, like the one like Scout's Honor, is that we typically want to pick stories that have, like, there's a reason why we're covering them. Either whether it gives a bigger thing for the main story, or the characters are really complete and full. We've already done a sort of story about military survivalists in this, so I think it's something that's very done already in the story. Whereas the story on Catalina is about a bunch of young scouts, a bunch of kids who survive, and I thought that perspective is going to be really cool to cover. The story's amazing, and actually it's all sitting in the can, waiting for the post process. So we're set to go. Let's see here. Ever think about doing a mini arc from the perspective of a smart zombie? Bodo wants to know. I've thought about that, and there are elements of that I might do in a certain way, maybe in the future, but we're talking years down the line. If we do something different. Let's see here. The family during the first days of the outbreak. O-Game was asking that. We actually might get a little bit of what happened with some of them in the future, but that I can't say for now. Can we get a reincarnated Scratch? Bodo was asking. I mean, come on. Once somebody's dead in the story, they're dead. Is Hogs now the leader of the army since Puck retired? Yes, actually. Chance was asking that. Puck retired, and also Michael is on a commission. So yes, Hogs is now in charge, and we will see some scenes with that coming up in future episodes. Are you bringing back the Maulers, Emma? Most likely not. I mean, most of them are pretty much gone. I can't think of any that really would remain at this point. Can people audition for future projects even if they're not in the United States? Yusuri asks that. Yes. So we will actually be in need of some background recordings and some extra elements for the second half of Descendants. And we're going to post them on our social media and stuff. So be sure to follow us on social media to make sure that people are following you're following what's happening. A couple stipulations is, one, they got performance have to be able to work that they're in the story, and two, it has to be a decent quality, because if it's not a good quality, it doesn't match everything else, then we won't be able to use it. But yes, it will be most likely small stuff. We don't do any really big main characters outside the main cast remotely, because unless they've already been established in the story, because it's that interactivity that we'd like to have, that suspension of disbelief we don't want to shatter. What kind of noises were used to create the bellows of the special biters cage? Some of it's a lot of human elements. There's a really fun video out there somewhere. I think it might be in our Patreon page, where I did some of the infected originally, like the and don't make me do that again. I've killed my voice several times doing this, and the of the big behemoths and things like that. And sometimes you do some special things, like I'll do that into a tub to make the voice deeper. And also sometimes it's a mixing of many things and elements into one. Babbitt asks, is it hard to keep spoilers secret when you've been working on this for so long? Yes, it has. Literally, like, the stuff of Descendants I've been working on since 2014, and I haven't been able to talk about it. I still can't talk about a lot of the things that are going to be revealed in the story. And there's stuff inside the episodes that people have no idea or are aware of that will come up later that people don't, you just don't have an idea yet for. And so I've had to keep it secret. Matter of fact, like 5 seconds before the live stream happened, I had to erase stuff off of my board, because I was doing some outlining on the board and figuring out some stuff. And so yes, it is hard to keep spoilers secret. NDAs abound. And last question coming in, unless there's more that comes in. Are you going to bring back Skittles? Emma asked. We'll have to wait and see. That's definitely a different one. Oh, we got one coming in very last minute from Salutary Goblin. I love that title. How many episodes of Descendants will there be? There are 12 chapters inside of Descendants season 1. We will have multiple seasons of Descendants. That's the plan anyway. Knock on wood. Hopefully all that works out well. I wasn't planning for the first pandemic that hit us, so hopefully there won't be a second. Anyway, that's the plan, is to do 3 seasons. That equals 36 chapters. Each chapter is broken up a little differently. Like some episodes will be 3. One chapter is broken up into 3 parts. Actually, like chapter 9 is broken up into 3 parts, and the last part is like 50 minutes. It's insane. And that's the last part, not the full chapter. A couple questions in the comments and come up on the screen. So go ahead and throw them in the screen there, Gino. Why are you being so mean to Bert? He has 1 leg and a couple fingers. He's the oldest, and he's still out there for the fine fight. He doesn't have 1 leg. He's got 2 legs. CJ has 1. And Bert's only missing his trigger finger. So that, I mean, I'm not being mean to him. I mean, but Bert's a fighter. He doesn't want to be at home anymore. He's just, that's how he goes. All right, what's the next one? Okay, Dylan asks, I know it isn't exactly on topic, but I'm curious to see, are there any groups of Survivor in West Virginia? Let's take a look. I got the map right here. West Virginia. Yes. Yes, I know where West Virginia is. It took me a second to remember. It's now called Pag-Asa. All these are pretty secure up here. There's the Battle of the Mississippi, where they were able to secure a lot of this. The outbreak happened on the West Coast, and they were able to get together and do fairly well on the East Coast. So these are all sort of divided up into their own little city-states. And they all have their own little stories now, too, which is kind of nice. Pag-Asa, since you brought up West Virginia, is actually kind of a pacifist's haven. They don't have any borders that are, hostile borders. So a lot of pacifists live in Pag-Asa now. Contrary to Warnock, which is very, very heavily war-related. It's practically in their name. And there's a lot of manufacturing of military weapons and things now in that state. There's a lot of stories that go on over here that we probably won't touch on because the East Coast is a lot, because it's still very, very active in everything that happens there. All right, next up. Quest says, what's been your favorite moment in the whole We're Alive series? Oh, man. Whew. There's been a lot of really great moments. I'm a fan of all the Lizzie and Saul stuff. I think that's some of the strongest material in the series. I think a lot of Datu stuff. Datu was the heart of the story survival, I think, in a lot of ways. A lot of great stuff there. I really enjoyed Gold Rush and elements that happened in Gold Rush 2. With some of the stuff that happened in there. My favorite moment, actually, I will say it right now, I loved the scene with Gloria playing the violin and everything that happens there, and the context of a slight spoiler is a character getting inebriated while playing a instrument while multiple events are going on at the same time in an audio fashion and having it all make sense. I also really like the train moment inside of Descendants. So I think those moments where you have a lot going on but still have it make sense in an audio format is probably my favorite, because it's really tough to have things be understandable inside the audio medium, and I think that's where we've shined sometimes. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes there's scenes where, having something come together, like the scene with all the people coming together to go off and find the kids, quote unquote, in Descendants, that was a hard scene as well. But so thanks, Quest. All right. What do we got? Omer asks, is the second half released in the same pattern of the first half, like a week off between chapters and a week after parts of chapters? Yes, so it's going to be the same way, where we say, for instance, you have chapter 6. I believe chapter 6 is 3 parts. I believe it's 3. I might be wrong. It might be 2. Where you have, we would release one episode 1 week. The next week is the next part, and then the next part, and then we take a week off in between chapters. That's still the plan. And the reason why is because it lets us catch up. Like, we have a lot of last-minute tweaks. We've done some last-minute voice work or some fill-ins. And so that's typically what it happens. Spicy, bless our Lord and Savior, Bert. Yes. And it's actually, if you're wanting to know how to spell Bert, it's B-U-R-T. Just a small thing. That's been something interesting, is also like seeing how people spell names because they don't ever see them. They're in the script, but you don't really get an opportunity to. Let's see here. Will we ever see Fredo again? Marvin's asking. Good question. Next question. I can't say. I will say that there's a lot of elements and characters that might come back. Some things I have to unintentionally answer and see what happens in the story. Will there be We're Live story on the group that traveled to Lake Matthews? Not really. I mean, Lake Matthews is kind of a little bit of a... Lake Matthews being that little Sallyport area. It's kind of nondescript. There's like a Tanya journal that I think that's on our Patreon about. She describes going through Lake Matthews a little bit. It's sort of like a little bit like a bad part of town, essentially, where there's, you know, some bad elements here that have been prevented from coming into the city. So they filter people through there. It's kind of like a dirty Ellis Island, to put it in a way. So most likely not. We won't really see much there. We do know that that is where Alex grew up, though, and that's also where his mother Rhonda lived. Small things. Would Robbins be a director if he made it to Descendants? Miss the banter of good old Greg, Carl, and Robbins. Yeah, me too. Maybe. They actually do have original programming going on in Westport. There are people that of the Hollywood industry that survived, and there is some original programming. Matter of fact, you might hear one of them in the background of some way in the series in the future. Matter of fact, I think Gino's actually working on that episode. Calling you out, Gino. Good afternoon, John. Let's see here. I think that kind of covers them. Is that it for us, Gino? That is a lot. Okay, so to wrap things up a bit here, if you have more questions, you can always feel free to follow up, post it on our social medias. We do have a We're Alive Facebook fan group that I interact with all the time. We also do have our Patreon page if you want to support us, because we really do appreciate the support. It does keep the lights on and stuff moving here at the company. We are working hard. As you can see, what goes into these episodes, it's a lot of work. We put in a lot more hours than I think anybody else in this industry puts in, just because we care with every meticulous detail and how these put together. So your support has greatly helped, even being here on our live stream today and giving us your comments and your likes and sharing the show. We're very, very appreciative. It's just one of these things that, you know, the more you tell people about the show, the more that catches on, the more that we can do in the future, because, you know, that's how we can grow. If you're following us, we also have a Discord page, our Facebook page, and we're live on YouTube. All elements, really cool background videos and things are on there, where you can interact with us. And we also have We're Alive is a subreddit on Reddit as well, r/We're Alive. No apostrophe in there. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here for this session, and for doing this, and for seeing all the background. I hope you find it interesting. Like I said, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to post them on social media, and I appreciate all of your support as well. This has been a great session. I really enjoy kind of revealing a little bit more about the series and showing you sort of what we've been doing all these years. And looking forward to the future of the series. So, as I say in Westport, stay alert, stay alive. We'll see you all again soon. Take care, everybody. And again, thank you for all your support. Take care, all.